So I had two really great teachers, and I studied with them on Thursday and Friday, and and they both sort of were coming from the same place, not the same place, but they're coming from a similar place, and they were getting to a similar place, but they came, their journey was completely different. One really was interested in color and just all of the magic that you can get with different color combinations against each other and on top of each other, and she would make me do these color exercises in class, where I learned so much. And she was always, in terms of critiques, she was always like wildly unimpressed by the work that I would bring in. So when I was taking class with her, I was a professional artist, and I was showing in this gallery that was very successful, and I was painting portraits professionally of strangers. And so I would bring in a portrait that I did that was done, that as far as I'm concerned was great, and I'd show it to her and she'd go, yeah, okay, all right. And then she was always, so unimpressed. And she'd grab my paints and my palette, and she'd mix up a color that was just much brighter, lighter, and more saturated than the palette of my painting. My painting would be finished, and
Hmm.
she would stick it right down there in the middle of the forehead. So I'd have this portrait, and then this glaring electric peach on top of the painting, and then she'd walk away and she'd go, paint it all up to that. And I would have to like enliven the color everywhere, foreground, background, clothes, face. So I had her on Thursdays, and then I had a teacher on Fridays, and it was all fundamentals, and it was all stuff that I didn't know before I met these two. I had a lot of experience, but I didn't understand. I understood how to draw. I had a teacher in high school who taught me how to draw plumb lines and all of that, and it was without that I don't know where I would be. But I didn't know anything about painting, and so it was all just fundamentals, lights and shadows and colors and all of that. And the notion of edges never occurred to me. It never occurred to me on my own that edges could be worthy of exploration and very descriptive when, depicting three-dimensional form, and in terms of design, in terms of what the viewer notices and what they don't notice. And so he introduced me to that concept, and then that one didn't, I was just telling you how I kind of got linear perspective from the beginning. I didn't get edges at all. I wanted to paint like Sargent, and he had these great edges, and he had these great accents. He'd have these accents, in the corner of a lip or in the corner of an eyebrow or the negative space against a face where he'd have a super sharp edge just shooting through there. So I would kind of blur some of my edges, and then I'd have really sharp edges. And my teacher, I could see he was always really nice, but I could see it just grating on his spine, like, kid, how do you not get this thing that I'm just explaining to you and I'm showing to you, and that one took a long time to kind of take, both in terms of me understanding why, why to explore edges, and also just physically how to do it. And at a certain point, and little by little, I had little like kind of epiphanies along the way. And at a certain point, it got to be intuitive. But those were critiques, the color and the edges. Those were critiques that helped a lot and that made me look at everything differently. The way that I describe it to my students is that, for the most part, sharp edges come forward both in space and in importance. So when we look at something, we notice the contrast and we notice the sharp edges. And edges that are softer or blurry or out of focus, not only do they look farther away, but we also don't notice them.
Hmm.
So once we can get comfortable with those notions, then it gets fun to start subverting it and playing with it. So maybe you have something in the background that you want to be really noticeable. And maybe there's something in the foreground that you don't want to be noticeable. And maybe there's a round object that's even soft, like a peach or something like that, that you do want to really stand out. And maybe you've got a stainless steel knife in the foreground that you don't want the viewer to notice. So it's like anything. Once you learn the rules, and the rules that you described are, as I would say, exactly right, and then you can start breaking them and turning them on their head and subverting them.